This is part 12 of the Craftsman Emerson 150 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 11, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be assembling the motor. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Before we get to the motor and continuing from part 11, we are removing the masking from the head casting after we painted the nose and the headband trim. So this is about an hour after I painted that stuff, and we're just going to go ahead and remove the masking. The paint is somewhat dry to the touch, but it's still just a little bit tacky. I like to remove the masking right at about an hour after I paint stuff, if possible, because it creates that nice crisp line. And if we let the paint fully cure, when we go back and remove that masking a couple of days later, sometimes it can take some of that paint with it and it won't make that line as crisp as it would be while the paint's still curing. So the other thing you need to keep in mind is we don't want to damage the champagne mist paint that we painted the rest of the head with. So as we remove the masking, we want to be careful with the X-Acto knife and the tweezers that we don't remove any of that champagne mist paint or scratch it in any way. We also have all of the original masking from when we painted the champagne mist still on this head casting, so we can go ahead and remove all of that as well. It may be better to wait until the nose and the headband trim has fully cured, so 4 or 5 days later, which is what I did. I went back and here we are removing all of that masking at that point. So you've got quite a bit of masking, and I actually missed one of the bores when I removed all this masking, and it wasn't until we get to the assembly stage that I realized that I forgot to remove that masking. Notice that whatever I've got the head turned on its side, I've got it resting on some 2x4s rather than my bench or anything else, because I don't want it to pick up any of that dirt, and I don't want it to get scratched up. That Lazy Susan I've got it sitting on has like a sandpaper type finish on it at this point with all that overspray paint on it, and if I lay the head casting on there, it would just tear away some of that paint. So I'm careful not to do that as well. All right, here we are with the stator, and we rewired this in part 11, so we're just going to clean it. And this is some CRC electrical contact cleaner. It comes out pretty forceful, so you really don't have to do a whole lot of scrubbing. You can just spray this stuff directly on it, and it blows away most of that dirt and debris and cleans everything up pretty good. None of this stuff has to be super clean. I just want to knock off the bulk contamination. And you'll notice that the windings on this motor, on this stator, are not wrapped with a twine, and normally they are. So here we're going to attach the reset panel for the Klixon overload protector, and I'm using number 4 drive screws that are about 1/4 of an inch in length. You can get that pack you see is like a pack of 100 of them for like $10 from McMaster Car, and we're just driving those in with a brass punch. And here we are with the rotor, and we're going to assemble the governor on the rotor now. So you have a paper insulator disc, and then you have the plastic sleeve, and it has a little cutout on it, and that spring actually has a little divot that goes into that cutout, and then it gets that cup washer, that metal cup washer on the bottom of it. So we'll just lubricate it a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and slide it on there. Next, we'll insert the two governor fingers, if you will, that fly out, and then we'll bend the frame back onto them so that they're kind of locked in place. And you have to depress that plastic piece and get those fingers locked in there to do that. And then lastly, we just got the two springs. We'll hook those onto each one of those wings or fingers. And then we'll check for function by just pressing down, and there we go. So here we have the terminal end frame and a terminal bar. We're going to install that terminal bar, and it has, luckily, most of the time I only end up with one or two of these little white insulators. I don't know what else you would call them. They're just pieces of paper, like a little paper washer. Somebody had commented on one of my other videos that these were just part of the assembly process and not necessary. And a lot of times I install these parts without these things, but I had enough of them with this motor, so they're going to go in. They just go on the back side of the screw and kind of keep the screw captured on that terminal bar as we insert it into the head frame and then tighten it down. And next, we'll install the Klixon thermal overload protection switch. And it just takes two screws to mount it. Now, these are still being made. You can still buy them, same brand and everything. And on the back side there, you can barely make it out, but there's a white alphanumeric number on the back side there. And if yours is bad for whatever reason, you can just order a new one. You can just Google Klixon overload protection switch and the number you need, and you should be able to find them. But in all the motors I've rebuilt, I've only had one that was bad. So here we're reassembling the switch assembly. So you have the switch, which is in my left hand. You have an insulator that lines up just like that. And then you have the shield, which is that metal plate. As soon as I get everything lined up, like so, and it just goes on the bottom. And then you get your two screws, put them in there, and then install that inside the end frame. So those screws are also supposed to get those white paper discs, but it's not critical. And then we're just going to route all that wiring. And we're going to kind of tap it under that shield so that it stays out of the way of the rotor. Ultimately, we just want to minimize as much loose wiring in this end as possible. So here we have the stator again, and I've got some jute twine, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap these coils because they're normally wrapped. This is one of the first motors I think that I've ever had of the 69, 62 series that didn't have them wrapped. So the coils have a lacquer on them that insulates them and keeps them from shorting. And if that insulation gets worn off and you get down to the bare wiring, then you will short the motor and it won't operate anymore. So this twine kind of keeps all those coils nice and tight, and as we slide the end frames over these ends, I don't want it to snag any of these coils and separate them or take the varnish or lacquer off of them. So that's why I'm wrapping them. This isn't necessary, but it's what I wanted to do. So after you've wrapped them, you can come back and spray a lacquer finish over the jute if you want, but it's not necessary. And if you're like me, you're probably thinking, well, jute's flammable. Why would you put that inside a motor? Well, cardboard is flammable, and that's what they use to insulate most of these motors as well. So I don't think it's going to be an issue. This is what they used during assembly back in the day. And I've done this on a couple of motors where I've had to redo all of the wrapping and have had zero issues with it. So, and I'm just using a pick to kind of create that gap there that I can fit the jute through carefully. I'm actually pressing on the cardboard tubes that the windings are in, rather than pressing on the winding itself. But yeah. So there we go. That's wrapping the motor, and probably should have done that in the rewiring video, but it didn't occur to me at the time because it's so rare that one of these motors isn't wrapped like this. So no big deal. Just an extra step we needed to knock out. So now we're going to go ahead and install the terminal end frame. And you can see we've got 5 wires coming off of the stator. So 3 of them are going to go up next to the terminal bar, and 2 of them are going to come out the bottom of the motor, along with 2 other wires that were inside the end frame itself. And you can refer to the wiring diagram that I included. It's in the description of the video, and that'll kind of give you an idea of where all that wiring is going to be going. So next we'll install the air cone in the other end frame. Literally, that's what they call this end frame on the parts diagram, which the owner's manual for this motor with the parts diagram is also in the description of the video if you need it. So now we can go ahead and install the rotor, governor side facing the terminal end. Then we're going to put the other end frame on. Careful not to snag it on any of those windings. And make sure it's lined up with the through bolt holes that are in the stator, and that both of the end frames are in a line. Next we'll install the bearings. So these are 87502 bearings with an extended race, and that extended race, the inner race is extended. It needs to be facing towards the inside of the motor. And on this end you get the spring washer, and then you get the gasket. And I'm going to take the 2 felts, the felt rings that go with this motor, and soak those in some 5W30 oil. So I cleaned those. I soaked them in some simple green for about a day or 2, and then rinsed them off and then dried them off completely. So now they'll sponge up that oil. And after they've soaked for a couple of minutes here, we have the end cap that's going to go on next. And after that, then we'll take one of those felts out of the oil and kind of dry it off. And slide it down like so. And then we have the felt retainer cap. And then we've got 4 screws that lock all that down. So I'm just going to install them kind of across pattern once we get to tightening them. And the other side is going to be basically the exact same thing, except there will be no spring washer. So once we've got that ready to go, we'll go ahead and tilt the whole motor on its side, I guess, or 90 degrees from where it is right now. And then we'll go ahead and insert the through bolts. And there are 4 of these. And they have those acorn nuts on each end. And we're just going to kind of hand tighten them for now. We're not going to go crazy with it. They're just going to keep the motor together. And we'll tighten those all down once we're ready to, or after we've installed the stator band. So here we are on the terminal end, and we're going to go ahead and connect all this wiring to the 2 terminals that it's supposed to go to. So over or out of a abundance of caution, I made a lot of this wiring much longer than it needed to be. So you'll see me cut and add new ring terminals to each end of the wiring, and then connect it as it's supposed to go. And then we'll tighten down the 2 brass nuts that go on those terminal screws. Then we can put the terminal cover on. This gets 2 screws. All right, so now we're ready to install the bearings and everything on this side. So we'll pull that last piece of felt out and go ahead and get as much of that oil out of it as we can by just compressing it there with a paper towel. We'll set that aside. So we get the bearing, the inner race extended goes towards the center of the motor. And this bearing should press in. If you need to, you can drive the bearing in just using a tube that's about a little wider on the inside diameter than the shaft itself, and just make sure it's resting on that inner race of the bearing when you do that. So then we'll just assemble all the other components, which was the gasket and the end cap, and then the felt, and then the felt retainer. And then we'll tighten those down like we did on the other end. All right, so now we're ready to install the stator band. So I actually ended up installing this stator band backwards, but it's not that big of a deal. I like to have the motor tag facing the on-off switch, but I didn't do it this time, so no big deal. So since we made those fingers a little longer than they needed to be, it's real easy to get them to match up, and then we're just compressing them with a pair of needle nose pliers, and then we'll flatten them as best we can with that brass tip hammer. Like so. Next we'll prepare the power cord. So I'm going to strip the shielding off of this about 1 foot. That'll give us plenty to work with. Sorry, it's off camera a little bit there. We're just cutting that shielding away. And I've already gone ahead and installed the base on the motor. It's got 1 screw in it already, and I put that rubber grommet in it. So we're just sliding the power cord through that rubber grommet. And to keep that power cord from being pulled out of the rubber grommet and out of the motor itself, we're going to install a Hog Ring, which is the wire stress relief that they used back in the 50s and the 40s. And you can get these off of Amazon. But a zip tie would probably work just as well. All right, so next we're going to go ahead and trim the ground, and then we're going to install a large ring terminal on there. And then we will go ahead and install that last screw that screws the base to the stator with the ground ring terminal between it and the motor, or between the base. So now we're just going to go ahead and connect the various wirings. So we got the white power coming off of the power cord going to one of the stator wires, and we're just going to connect that with a blade terminal. And we've got the black that's going to go to the switch. So we got 2 wires up near the switch. We're just going to make sure we've got enough wiring there, and then we'll cut those and we're going to solder them onto the switch. And once we've got them soldered onto that switch, then we're just going to add some of that liquid electrical tape to each one of those solder points and help shield them. Then we can install the switch. It's got the switch panel and the nut that goes on the outside. And see, this is where you would want to see the motor data panel, but it's on the other side. No big deal. Not the end of the world. So next we've got the capacitor, and it's got its cardboard sleeve that it goes in. And then we'll make the proper connections with the wiring, route all of that stuff, and then get it all nice and flat inside there. And then we can add the capacitor cover. And this just takes 2 screws. So if you lay out your screws like you've seen me do on the right hand side there, you can figure out which ones go where. All right, so next we're just going to tighten down all those through bolts. There's 4 of them. So make sure all that is nice and compressed and that the end frames are snugged up to the stator band. Then we'll test the motor. So let's plug it in, add power to it. And then throw the power. There we go. Make sure it's not going to shock us. Make sure it's not getting hot. Then we'll turn it off and we'll listen for that click of the governor disengaging. And it's good. All right. We've got a working motor. So that's going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. In the next video, we will be beginning the assembly. If you have any questions or comments, add them to the comments section below. And as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.